Hello everyone and welcome back to the LPL Last Hit. It is the 1st of July today and we have decided to completely boot out Lyric for the Superior Analyst. So joining me today is going to be Jamada, Ox, and of course my name is Dagda. And Ox, how are you doing? You're just off the cast. How are you feeling?
I'm good. It was a really fun cast, and Lyric isn't here. Can I get any better? I am pretty annoyed at Lyric because he's been bailing on our TFT duos. He said he was going to LA, and then he said his flight got cancelled. He's been here this whole time. He hasn't been playing TFT with me, so Lyric is dead to me.
You did steal his Warwicks though. And Jamada, I've just come off the back of your first time casting the LPL. So, I mean, it's been a pleasure to absolutely have you. You smashed the cast. Yes. But I got to say, what was it like kind of stepping up from, because you've been involved a lot in the ERLs. Obviously, you were a coach previously as well. So what was it like moving from like the ERLs into that spot in the LPL?
Yeah, it was pretty wild, right? The step up in gameplay as well. Because like the first series, I'm casting V5 against W, and then the second series I'm literally casting like 3 or 4 world champions, and it's just like whoa, like the scale up was definitely kind of insane, and thankfully I got treated, even though they were kind of like stompy-ish, like the games were super fun to watch and cast over, so I got to have a whole bunch of fun, and it was obviously very amazing.
Yeah, I think when I first joined the LPL last year in summer, I remember I was casting Jackie Love. This was like the first time I'd cast a world champion ever. And then he ran it down. I was like, wow, I'm casting a world champion, running it down. This is amazing. This is what LPL is all about, right? We have so many stacked lineups, so many fantastic players, and they just go balls to the wall, non-stop action, limit testing every game. I love it.
I was about to say, little did you know that you're actually just going to be casting the first time Jackie Love ran it down in the games that you had from Jackie Love. But,
he's done a lot of that.
Yeah, just a small bit. But I kind of had the same thing where I was like, I was super excited coming over in spring 2020 when I first joined the LPL because I was a big Uzi fan. And then I got here in 2020. I was like, oh boy, I'm ready. Gonna cast me some Uzi. This is going to be great. And I was like, oh, well, he takes time off for the Chinese New Year. I was like, oh yeah, don't worry, he'll be back. And then I kind of just sat there, and like it wasn't 2 weeks, it was like 2.5 years later. Eventually, this man comes back into the league. But definitely star-studded. I think a lot of us have been coming across into the LPL with just both the gameplay and just how absolutely insane the talent that we have here is. But speaking of people that are making a kind of headway and superstars coming into the lineup, I wanted to take a quick glance over at BLG because we've had Icon who's come into the BLG roster, and I'm not going to lie, the conversations that we had Ox last week on the podcast was, hey, one guy isn't going to make a big difference. BLG, they need way more communication. There's so much else that's going on, but I'm not going to lie, Icon's made a pretty good start on things.
Yeah, I actually think it's been. I thought, I was like, okay, maybe they need some like Rookie or Xiaohu, right? Maybe that's what they need, like in the mid lane to make this roster work. No, they just needed someone who's willing to take the L. And Icon has come in and he's like, look, I don't care about these CSD numbers and goal difference. I'm like, I'm gonna leave lane, I'm gonna roam, I'm gonna win. That's how it's gonna work. And I feel like the problem with BLG is we had all these players who on the previous rosters were absolute stars who were like, I'm the carry, give me your waves, give me these jungle camps. And they just don't interact well together. They're slow to move on the map because they're like, oh, I'm going to stay for 2 more waves so I can get my item. And Icon's just like, no, I will play for the team. He was finding some fantastic roam timings. The one I remember was he was playing Silas into Ryze, and yet he was out roaming the Ryze consistently. So a big positive. And kind of a polar opposite from Fofo. Fofo was very much like, I am in my lane. That is my kingdom. I'm not leaving.
Yeah, that was something I noticed a lot with Fofo. You kind of hit the nail on the head with the, waiting around to get his item power spike, because there's so many times where I'd be like screaming at my screen, being like, why is Fofo in the side lane? You're about to fight for Dragon, you've got like 50 seconds until it resets, and then you look and Fofo's just there in his ear like poking, and I'm just like, just reset! Just get back! It doesn't matter about the item. Like, it doesn't matter how many items you have if you're not going to be there for the fight. And it felt like that was such a compounding problem that they had. And as you said, I think the fact that we're getting to see them roam more often, that Icon is actually as willing to give up waves. Now, I will say, I don't know if he's willing to give up waves. I will say some of the fights that they've had have kind of forced him, I will say, to give up waves, because you can't really collect waves if you're dead. But in the grand scheme of things, I think he's like actually a very positive change for BLG with just, as you say, finding someone that can actually start off skirmishes and make sure that they're going to be able to find at least some sort of early game control, because it's just been so lacking for BLG.
Yeah, and I also think, like, kind of just to add to both of your guys' points too, traditionally when we see teams put together rosters with like 3 sort of like star laners or what you'd basically just call like the guys that want all the resources, it's really, really hard to, facilitate that for most teams, and there typically almost always has to be that one guy who just says, okay, fine, I won't get any waves, and I will just, kind of in a way maybe put myself behind, but as long as I'm propping the others up, we'll get to see the other side laners in this instance, obviously, with Icon come in and carry. We've seen it, I feel like, with the Vitality roster most recently, and even like if you look back, I think, what was it, like the TSM Super roster years and years ago, where it was like Double Lift Bjergsen and another like hyper carry in the top side. I can't recall who it was.
2014.
Alliance 2014. Yeah, like you could just name list after list. I think Super rosters, it's just really hard. Even from a coaching perspective, I feel like it's super hard to try and get all 3 lanes to have super high resource. So yeah, I think Icon doing the right thing, and it's definitely showing a little bit for BLG on the Rift.
I think the big question for me, though, and I'm going to pop it over to you two lads, is like, how do we actually feel about BLG's success? Because for me, it's kind of like, okay, well, I can see that they're doing the right things, but I still feel like there's so much miscommunication in their team fights, and like target selection seems off. I don't know if it's going to be enough to try and put them in towards a good spot. Like, they have half, 2/3 of the split left, or just under. So do you think it's enough time for them to kind of right the ship and maybe see themselves do well in playoffs? Or do you just think it's, look, this is definitely a roster that we're looking at more for spring 2023?
I would say I feel like this roster's not going to... I mean, I'll put it bluntly. This team probably will make playoffs. They're not going to make Worlds. The roster's probably going to get remade going into next year. That is my trajectory, I think, for this roster. I think Icon might make a difference. That might mean, they do better. But even like spring playoffs, they made it through the first round. But I think with like the player names on this roster, the expectation is that they should be going to Worlds, right? Which is, it's hard to say in the LPL, because even though we have 4 slots, there's a lot of teams. But like the expectation coming in spring, BLG didn't put this roster together. They didn't sign Uzi, so they could be like, oh, guys, we came 7th, good job. It's like, no, this team is there to make it a Worlds, and I think they're so far away from that. Like, this team will never be better than V5, never be better than Top Esports, never be better than RNG, never be better than JDG, and that's 4 off the bat before I even move down to other teams like EDG, Weibo, anyone's Legend,
Yeah,
though Dan has the right gauge, and I think, like, realistically, you look at the rest of the league right now towards the top end, it's just a really tall ask to make it to top 4, I think, with the way that they're playing. And if you're asking for, development time, I'm just not sure there is quite enough time. But playoffs is like the bare minimum. You look at the names on the roster, you're like, yeah, like any other league, this is almost guaranteed like world slot, but it's just not the case here, especially with the way they're playing. I hope for their sake, at the very least, they can like maybe make it competitive, right? Make it all the way up to like maybe 5th. But again, even Dan, just this is not the top 4, and then there's just more below it with like Weibo and EDG. So I'm not sure what we'll actually get to see from them, but I hope for their sake they can at the very least give us something special.
On that conversation then, do you think that there is a team that you think might surprise people? Anyone's Legend? I know Ox is going to say a second, but is there a team that you think could surprise then like push right the way up into a good playoff spot? Or is there any team that you're kind of looking at going, hey, there's been a lot of people talking about, like, for instance, JDG. I don't know how hot you guys are on them. Like, there seems to be a lot of teams that have a serious amount of conversation about them. Like, are these teams that you see going forward in the future, or do you think they're kind of overhyped at the moment?
Yeah, if anyone's Legend doing well as a surprise to you, you haven't been watching, man. I mean, I joke. I think, coming off the series today, really strong performance against V5. AL are a team who's like team fighting. Even in spring, they've had like, I've specific moments. The series against CDG where they have this fantastic team fight from Even Gold, where they just absolutely manhandled the backline of EDG. And I think they've always had this ability to come back into games because of the team fighting. The early game has been a bit rough, but I think the series against V5 has shown big improvements to that. It gives me more confidence. And I'm hoping that they make it in the playoffs and have a decent run. But to answer, like, in terms of teams, I think, in fact, this one's a great one because tomorrow we have JDG against FPX. And I feel like those are on opposite ends of the spectrum. I think JDG haven't had too many challenges so far. Yes, they beat Top Esports at the start of the split, but game 3, honestly, Top Esports bot lane just ran out. Plus, it's Top Esports. Top Esports could lose to anyone. You're like, yeah, I could see it. I think JDG hasn't really been challenged so much. And even then, if you look at a series, like, they dropped a game against OMG, they 2-0'd TT, but it was pretty close. They dropped a game against Ultra Prime. Like, it hasn't been super convincing. And then on the other side of the coin, you have FBX, who... other than that IG loss, which was a bit of a weird one, they went up against CDG, they took a game. They went up against RNG, they took a game. They went up against V5, and they didn't take a game, but at least they kept it relatively competitive. And then they went up against Top Esports and took a game. They've had a very hard schedule, and then they played RA earlier this week, and they just absolutely annihilated them into the ground. So, I don't necessarily think FPX is something like a top team overnight, but I think their scoreline and JDG's scoreline aren't completely, reflecting where they are. I think FPX... I'm going to call it now. I think FPX can upset tomorrow, can upset JDG. I actually think there's a decent chance of that happening. And I think JDG, I'm not saying JDG are bad. I'm not saying FPX are, fantastic, best team in the league. But JDG are ranked second right now in the standings. I don't think they're the second best team in the league. And there is no way in hell that FPX are the 16th best team in the league. So, that's my prediction. Upset tomorrow. I'm ready for it. And if it happens, you can come in the comments and say, wow, oh, so smart. If it doesn't happen... then just don't leave a comment.
Yeah, no, I actually really agree. And on a brief note, because FPX was probably my shout. I want to give a shout out to Care in particular. I feel like Care's been having a pretty decent time of things this split. I feel like I'm not gonna say he's been elo held, because we said he's had a bit of a all FPX and as a whole have had a bit of a tough schedule, and they've been taking games off of the teams that they've been losing to. But I think if it for me, it seems that Dan's taken my pick away. I would probably say maybe Ultra Prime. I like Ultra Prime. Coming into it from an outsider's perspective, I think they could maybe be like a dark horse to bottom end playoffs at the very least, from what I've seen. But maybe my my ignorance to the rest of the strength of the league is a little bit too strong. But I've liked them. Anytime I've seen them, they've really been definitely kind of a surprise team to see. I think LNG is also a very interesting team to talk about right now in terms of league strength, because roster strength to how they're playing is not matching up at all.
Yeah, I mean, they're 7th in the league. I think you double that, honestly. That's a bit harsh, but I honestly feel like LNG, it's crazy. It's kind of similar to BLG in the sense that this is a lie. You have Tarzan and Doinby. That's enough. Do I even need to continue the conversation? Yes, I do, because what are they doing? What's going on? Tarzan's really struggling. Doinby's been okay. Corky Meta's been vibing for him, but that game against TT, I expect this of TT. TT, I don't hold any slight towards you for that series. Maybe a little bit for that UKEL play, but LNG and the LNG TT series, the fact they made me watch that, oh my lord, man. Both teams just doing something. And LNG, they went 3-0 at the start of the split, and we always have Spring, they went 7-0 and then collapsed. But then we had Summer before, they went 7-0, collapsed. They didn't even get there. They got to 3-0, and then they just completely fell apart. And I really I looked through the top 10 teams, and I'm I even looked through to I feel like LNG could lose to anyone at the moment, honestly. Maybe not WE. They couldn't lose to WE. That's about it. I feel like every other team in the league could capably beat LNG, and a sizable amount will beat LNG convincingly.
Yeah, I find it hilarious that we always looked at Doomby as this roaming god that was just going to be everywhere on the map, and then you look at his most successful champion, or at least his most played champion anyway for this split, and it's Corky. You sit in the mid lane and farm up. You don't actually go and do anything. And that's basically what LNG have become, where it's every time I seem to watch this team, it's Tarzan who will solo maybe figure out a time where he can take a Rift Herald or a Dragon, but he isn't really getting help from anywhere. And it just feels like this whole team that, in theory, has if you look at when we saw this team on paper, this makes so much sense. Light does really well with resources. You got Ala, who likes to play these split pushers. You got Tarzan and Doomby, this really strong mid jungle that can go for roams and go for plays. And where is it? I don't understand why there's just zero communication at all in this team. Nobody's going to do anything. It's so frustrating to watch. And I kind of agree with Ox. I don't know if they'll be 14th, but I really don't see this team doing well. It's so bizarre. And everything just looks super messy. Even when you look at down to simple stuff like how they try to approach fights and objectives, it's just an absolute mess. The amount of times I've seen them start fights where they're 4 versus 5, and their straggler Light is making his way to the fight, and they're oh well, time to engage. You're but why? Why?
I don't understand, because okay, meta shifts definitely affect teams, right? That is a given. But I just don't understand how LNG has regressed so far. It's like, I don't know. You look at the patch notes, it's like, oh, they've nerfed Zeri's Q by like 5 damage. I guess we can't team fight anymore. Like, how does that even make sense? Like, I don't care how many patches come through. That doesn't justify the fact that fundamentally this team has just fallen apart. I can't wrap my head around it, especially since we saw them at Worlds, you know, and in playoffs in summer last year have a pretty good run. And now it's just like, I mean, even Tarzan, it feels so weird to me because Tarzan, I think last year was like so phenomenal. And even someone who I said in spring, it was rare to see Tarzan being the one underperforming, and he had some bad games. And now it's just like, I don't even know, man. I don't know who to look for. And I feel like also you get times where like someone will have a good series, like Doinby will have a good series, or maybe Arle will have a good series, or even Tarzan, Light. I want your Lumao. Everyone is capable of having a good series. They just can never do it at the same time. Someone always has to run it down, and it will cost them the series.
Yeah,
we've missed it. How did we miss this? It's the icon buff. Clearly, icon was the only thing that made this team good. That's what we're missing, you know?
It's really true. And it's kind of just to continue the point, I feel like if we're looking at where LNG like are their most likely trajectory, I think the name power alone and just the fact that they do, you know, like Dan said, everyone is very capable of carrying. It's just whether or not they do it at the exact same time. I think they should probably still make playoffs, right? In most worlds. But will they go far? I think that's like the big question. I just can't see it happening. Like they'll make bottom of the barrel playoffs and then they just go out in like round 2 or something, and that's kind of
that's what happened in spring. They got like 3-0 annihilated by top esports. It was brutal.
The scary thing is they haven't even really played many of the top teams either yet, and they're still kind of struggling like this. So yeah,
they're stuck in the mud at the moment. Honestly, they're like in the trenches, battling off the likes of AL and stuff. I don't think I've actually played it. Have they played AL yet?
I think they have.
They did. Yeah, AL beat them, didn't they?
Yeah.
I know they
like,
lost.
You know,
they beat AL. Sorry.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, they beat AL, which is a feat. But I feel like LNG are like stuck in the mud of all these games. But it's like next game is against LGD tomorrow. It would be so bad for LNG if they lost that. Then they play IG again. So bad if they lost that. Then they play JDG. They will lose that. Then they play FBX. I think in current form they lose that. Then they play RNG. They lose that. Next up is Ultra Prime. Maybe V5 lose it. EDG lose it. Like they are really going to struggle from here on out. Like it is not going to get easier. If anything, it's just going to get way harder.
Yeah, their last 5 games kind of look rough. Like with the exception of WE, like they get smashed by 3 out of 5 of those teams if they continue to play like this. So good luck, LNG.
And I think that's the thing when you're like talking about, say, FPX, who are on a little bit of a resurgence, BLG now, who are starting to get their stuff together. Like, there's a lot of teams that can look to start to overtake them, and if you end up losing out to like teams like Ultra Prime and that kind of stuff, you can very quickly see these guys coming out. Because honestly, like, I think we've had a bit of a conversation about this. The ceiling in the LPL is actually rising quite dramatically, and for teams that are falling, like, there's not much wriggle room anymore. Like, our bottom teams are actually, I'm going to take WE out of the contention because, look. But the rest of our teams, they look fantastic. Like, they actually look so much better than they have previously.
Yeah, no, and I'll even say, like, all those years ago when I was a coach, like, we would case study LPL teams, and sometimes it wouldn't even be, like, the team that is the hot team of the month. Like, sometimes you will just be studying objective setup from like 8th, 9th placed LPL teams because they just know how to do it. And that is kind of the scary thing about, you know, especially if you're in that mix or in the middle of teams where you're not quite, you know, that top 4, 5, but you're also not like the worst in the LPL. Man, it is tough because it's just like, you're just in a Royal Rumble and you're just dodging hits left, right, and center from every single match.
Yeah, I feel like the middle of the pack is so blurry. Like, top of the table is very clearly defined, but middle of the pack is just really blurry. And I feel like there's, like, for every team, you can have, like, big strengths, big weaknesses. Like, AL, really good at finding these team fights, even when from a deficit. Early game is a bit underwhelming. And sometimes can choke in later fights if they don't, like, ideally go for the setup. You know, Chocho goes too ham on an Amumu engage or something. But, like, you have these 2 aspects of them, and, like, teams will have different aspects, and it can really shape interactions with each other, and, like, it can result in, you know, maybe LNG beat out AL, but AL might beat out another team. But it just feels so muddy. Like, it feels so hard. I think top 4 is a lot easier to place at the moment than it is to go from, like, 6th onwards at the moment. And I feel like so many teams have had positive notes, and then they've had underwhelming notes. AL nearly beat V5, made it really close today, but then AL got beat by LNG and LGD, right? LGD had a really good series, but they've also had some bad. Like, it just feels so hard to pin down how good these teams are because it varies so much day on day.
And I think the really interesting thing as well, because you kind of hit on it there, is like how some of the changing meta is going to affect these teams as well. Because you look at like the Amumu starting to creep in because he got really strong in 12-12. Also, you look across at LEC and you see the most disgusting compositions with every bit of healing that you can fathom that exists in the game is in these teams. And you're like, it feels like there are moments where teams that just have a better grasp on what the meta is, or, you know, certain things that maybe they find are super strong or work for their team can actually catch these teams out. And I mean, realistically, we see every single year or every single split that it is just 1 to 2 games, and I'm not even talking series. I mean 1 to 2 games that separate so many of our teams. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how well we see these teams adapt.
Yeah, adaptation is also like traditionally adaptation is like a very, very important thing. I think this is maybe in league history, as long as I'm not forgetting something super impactful, this is maybe going to be one of the most important splits to be super adaptable, right? Because we've just come off of this sort of like 3-4 year stint of everybody getting one shot if they like breathe incorrectly, to fights going effectively what feels like 20 to even 30 seconds longer in some instances, because everybody is just tankier. And since 12.10, there's already been like 2 big patches already. I don't think 12.12 is live anywhere on competitive yet, but even 12.12 is a fairly sizable patch. And 12.11 was basically as big as 12.10. And I'm not sure whether or not that's going to slow down. So ensuring that teams are keeping up with the meta is going to be super important to ensure that they can stay at the top. So yeah, I more look towards Riot on this, and I was like, hey guys, Balance Team, can we slow down some of the changes a bit?
I feel like this is kind of like, because normally you have like a big change that completely reshapes the game. Like an example I used was the item rework they did when they brought in mythic items. They brought it in preseason. It was massive, completely reshaped the game. And then they had patches to adjust. Because like, for example, Brand was so strong because you could build Leandri's Demonic Embrace. The dot was insane. He was one of the best champions in preseason. He got nerfed. He got balanced down. He never really showed up when we came into competitive. The problem is that we got this in the mid-season. Yeah. So we got this. 12-10 came in. Teams didn't have much time to practice. Massive overarching changes that just change absolutely everything. Things like Kale are coming out of nowhere. We got all these bot lanes that are cropping up. Like we heard talk of Cog Lulu, but it never came to fruition. Kalista Renata is like absolutely insane. Senna Tom is back in force. And then we have 12-11, which is like normally we'd have this in the preseason, so no competitive going on. A big patch to compensate for the big system changes. And it was a massive patch. They even had a hotfix included in it as well. And then even that wasn't enough. They still have 12-12 to readjust again. So as a result, we just keep getting these humongous changes coming in. And it's, as you said, Adrian, I completely agree. It's very hard to adapt onto this because you may have, like, for example, V5 are fantastic with Senna Tom. Senna and Tom are being nerfed in 12B. So how does that change how well V5 do? How does that change priority? We're seeing things get worked out. Amumu hasn't actually been buffed yet. On 12-12, he's buffed. And
LPL
yet,
teams are
we
just
saw him
spamming
pick
it right
today.
now,
We saw it banned because what happens is they start playing it in solo queue because it's been buffed. And they're like, whoa, this actually feels really strong. Maybe I'll try it, you know, in our scrims. And they're like, oh, this was strong before. But the problem is because we got so many changes, it was so difficult for teams to solve the meta. And then it shifts again. And then it shifts again. So I feel like teams are just playing catch up at the moment. And hopefully we get things stabilizing by the time we get to playoffs. But it is very difficult to keep on top of like the picks. Like Lucian Nami is another great example. Super high presence, completely pick ban, and now the priority has dropped off a cliff because, you know, teams have thought we've solved this. We know how to beat this, know how to deal with this. It's not as much of an issue with the durability changes that initially people thought would make Lucian Nami suffer has actually now taken effect. And Lucian is nerfed in 12-12. Again, it's a patch that comes after the meta has kind of been developed because, you know, teams are trying to keep up. The patch notes are trying to keep up. It's just so rapid fire.
Yeah, patches like this just make me really glad that I'm a retired coach and I don't have to try and figure out how to teach teams this, to be honest. I actually can't even see it slowing down, and that's the scary thing.
I feel like the most mind-blowing one was 12-10. Tower dives being like, oh, okay, tower dives are super hard. You have to completely change your read on how when and where you can tower dive, and then 12-11 completely shifts that.
Yep.
Like teams are so practiced in understanding of how to do tower dives. Teams will have practiced this so many times so well, and then they just change it, and then they change it again the next patch. And like I think the LPL approach was the best, where they just said, "Screw it, we're just gonna keep doing tower dives," whereas other regions slow down a bit. But I feel like that's helped us going on a 12-11.
Yeah, and I'll even say, and that's probably my last part on it. In the NLC, we actually started on 12-9, so we had the old version, pre-durability patch. So that week 1, it was night and day, right? The games are super fast paced. People are getting like dove on 3rd or 4th wave on the bot lane, and then week 2 rolled around and 12-10, and legit on both of those days, it was like a 7-hour studio day because every single game was 45 minutes almost, because no one wanted to do anything in the early game. Like everyone was scared to death of tower diving, and it just meant we got these like stalemates entirely. And then 12-11 rolled around, basically week 4, and the tower diving basically resumed. So yeah, teams are like going through a loop at the moment, having to figure out what's actually the best thing to do, not even just like draft side, just game plan wise as well.
I think for me, the most underrated, well, maybe not underrated, because I think it's going to be talked about a lot, is the Grievous Wounds changes. I was playing a game in League last night against an Aatrox. I couldn't kill him. There were 5, he wasn't even fed. He was like 1 of 4, and he gets the Hex Drinker, Maw Shield, and the healing off of that. He gets Death Stance, his Gore Drinker, his World Ender, and we got him down to 80 HP. He Gore Drinkered and landed a Q on a sweet spot, and he was like full health again. And I was like, this is insane. And I feel like it's going to be such a big deal, because especially when you've already started to see it creep into LEC with things like the Soraka, Senna lanes, the Seraphine coming super popular as well. It just feels inevitable that these super long, drawn-out fights with a ton of sustain are going to be coming.
Yeah, what I don't understand is because when we came into 12-10, they said, okay, people are going to be more durable, fights are going to be longer. So, like, if you think about if someone's not dying, you have more chance to heal them in a longer fight. The healing's going to have more time to come in. Like, shielding is better against bursting, whereas, like, Soraka, fantastic in these long, drawn-out fights, right? And then, so they're like, okay, durability is going to make that stronger, so we're going to nerf healing and shielding to make up for it. Great, fantastic. So that should balance out. But then, like, oh, we're actually also going to nerf Grievous Wounds. Okay, and then they've just nerfed Grievous Wounds again. So we're having longer fights, more scaling, people are tankier, dying less. Grievous Wounds is also nerfed, and then they did obviously nerf healing to compensate, but I just don't think it's enough. Like, Grievous Wounds was 40% base, 60% empowered. It's now 25% based, 40% empowered, and like that percentage makes a huge difference. So I feel like, before, if someone had healing, you go like Chemtech Putrefier and it really hamstrings them. They're still effective, but a little less so. Now I feel like you have to go Grievous Wounds if you get something like a Soraka. It's a no-brainer, but I just don't think it does enough. I just don't think it's really going to stop them, and they will just heal through it. And again, no one's going to die. Everyone's going to be super tanky. I feel like LPL is probably one of the regions I feel like are quite far away from like leaning into this. Obviously, you talked about, Rob, that we saw it in the LEC, some of these comps coming out, but I feel like there's so much potential. Like, if enemy team is picking, I don't know, Senna Tom, like, you can just pick Soraka. You can just match sustain for sustain, outscale like crazy. They won't really have too much pressure if you have a strong AD carry. And then in team fights, it's like, it's so much harder to pick up the Soraka. If they don't kill you, you're just going to be able to heal up a Storm. And then even if they do kill you, they focus so many resources to kill on the Soraka, the AD carry can be in a comfortable position to then carry on the team fight. Like, I think it just makes sense with all the changes that come through. And I really think that maybe like the fact it's gone from 40% to 25 and 60 to 40 is so big.
As a Red Cane enjoyer, this does put a smile on my face. That's all I can really say. Healing's in a very weird spot, and I wonder if we're actually going to see more of that out in the LPL. Like you guys said, it's been relatively rare. Europe is just like a melting pot of really weird mad scientists that just. I think it's because of solo queue. There's just so many OTPs that kind of put things on the radar, in particular. But yeah. They need to do something about it. It's not looking particularly good at the moment. How strong it has the potential to be, at least.
Yeah, I think we kind of get away with it a little bit in the LPL because I think Ox, you said this before, where it feels like a ton of our supports kind of just met as a secret room in the back one time. We're just like, hey, look, we all agree not to play this. I'm pretty sure you brought this up before. Max. Yeah. And it's just like, I feel like that is the case though, because like even when we start to see enchanters become strong, we're still seeing a ton of things like the Nautilus, and then people are like, oh, he picked Nautilus. That means I don't have to play an enchanter. That means I get to play like a Braum even. I'll take Braum. I don't want to play an enchanter. Like, this seems to be the way that it goes, and I think it can work out like relatively well from an entertainment standpoint, where it's like, oh, well, you know, we are going to just keep playing these engaged tanks. We saw it last year at Worlds as well, where there was like a ton of people who were just playing these engaged tanks all the time in LPL, and then we got to Worlds, and everyone was like, oh, but enchanters. And then Mako was like, oh, crap, I got to figure out how to play these stupid things now.
Yeah, I feel like it's such a weird one, because like I feel like we've had some, but like it's basically been Renata and then the rest, you know? Like we have the occasional Karma when it was Ezreal Karma, but Seraphine a bit when it's Senna Seraphine. I feel like there's just windows that teams aren't leaning on. Like they have the combos in mind. They're like, okay, this is a duo we can have. This is a strong duo. But like there's definitely times where like teams pick stuff, and I'm like, you could easily pick, you know, an enchanter here. I think the greatest example that I loved was Hung in Spring. I think it was against AL where Rakan was picked. He went Lulu, and they just absolutely annihilated them in lane. Obviously, Rakan very bad at like punishing enchanters because he just doesn't have as much threat as like Leona and Nautilus. And then when it came to team fights, he was like interrupting all the Rakan Ws when he was ulted with his Lulu ultimate. So like, there's windows where if a player's proficient, they'll bring it out, but so many are just unwilling. And I feel like the problem is, right, like the way the balance goes is like you look globally. And, like, there's more enchanters coming in. They're like, oh, you know, Leona's underperforming. Let's buff Leona's damage. That's coming on 12B, I believe. Leona's getting a buff to a passive damage. Yeah. And then all the LPL sports will go, they're buffing Leona? Oh, great. Time to spam Leona. And I'm like, dude, it's, you know, whatever. Do what you want. Play what you want. You know, I think a lot of it as well is because we've had this meta for such a long time. The support you're going for are these ones who are like setting up the engage for the team, being the ones that are proactive. If you've been playing that way for 4 years, where like your support is the one who calls the shots and says, we go now, and is playing these picks, to switch to now, okay, we no longer have the support calling the shots. Like, we have teams like RNG who have kind of like managed it by saying, okay, Xiaohu's the one who calls the shots now. He's very vocal anyway. We'll stick him on Galio or Lissandra so he can make the engage happen. But I think a lot of these teams are like, you know, it's a struggle. If you've been so reliant on this person making the plays happen, and that's been their role in the team, you will prioritize picking up players who fit that role, and then that will become like the meta for supports in the LPL for so long period. Very difficult just to like overnight say, okay, change how you play the game, change all the champions you play. You are now an enchanter. You're a good little kitten.
But no, you raise a really good point, because I think especially when you take a look at how like teams are normally set up competitively in terms of like their in-game infrastructure, like for comms, normally it's like jungler in the early game, sometimes support it, like they share responsibility, but then in the mid game, it often a lot of the like macro decisions can fall on the support. And I think when you've got teams who've been playing this way, like this way of League of Legends of Nautilus, Leona, that's basically it for what, 4 years now, like I think. And then you say, hey, now you're losing all your playmaking tools. It's definitely like a weird shake-up for a lot of teams, because they're just not used to having the person who's normally, I'll just kind of dub it like the in-game leader in terms of making like snap decisions on things that all of a sudden don't really have like immediate agency. Yeah. And for some teams, it's just gonna take time to adapt. Or you could just be like the LPL and just say, you know, enchanters, they don't exist, and we can just keep playing how we're playing. Yeah. But I think for teams that can still play, you know, that can play the enchanters, I think it's going to be like a super big benefit, because I'm still very much of the belief that like enchanters currently, post durability patch, dumps the most engaged supports if like the matchup is played right.
Just Renata.
Yeah. I feel like they're just so strong at the moment. I feel like going back to like the like calling the engage, when I was a player, I specifically remembered, we went through some scrims, and I said to my coach, I'm not playing Braum again, right? Because I was struck. I was the one who was like calling the engages, and I'm just on Braum. It felt like I was so useless. Like I had to rely on someone else to engage, and I feel like it's so hard if you're the one calling the shots to call for someone else to engage. Yeah. You can definitely do it. You can be like, okay, look for an engage now, but like there will be windows. There'll be like a moment where like the enemy AD carry steps up, and if you're the one who's making the calls, and you could say, okay, I go. Like you see the window. It's so much harder to convey that to your teammate and then express that window. Like, obviously, like a good team, everyone's on the same page, and like there's teams like RNG where you definitely feel like that's the case, but it can really be a struggle. Like, not everyone's going to see the game in the exact same way. You know, not everyone's going to see the 4-mana Mumu ult from Chocho. So when Chocho is like, I see that window, he's just like, I see it, I'm going, the team trust, they follow. It's very different if it's like, okay, you know, this game, it's going to be, Xiaohao, you're going to look for the engage, try and find this window. Oh, I think this is a good window. And it's like, oh, sorry, I wasn't in position. I was moving back mid or something like that. Like, it takes a lot of practice to get up to that level. And I also think it just makes it more difficult. So it's a lot of teething issues. And I think at the end of the day, the problem is the league is going on. This isn't just about practice. And I know a lot of people will be like, well, why don't you just practice and go, okay, we're going to play the style we think is best, and then we'll learn and get better. It's summer split, right? This is the big one. This is the one where you got to World. You want to make playoffs. You don't have the time. Like, if you, let's say you have like a 30% win rate with enchanters that will eventually grow to a 60% win rate, or you have a 55% win rate now playing those melee supports, you take the melee supports, right? Because at the end of the day, you need wins now to make it into playoffs. Like, maybe it's a bit different for the top teams, but even then, like, they still want to try and make sure that they're winning these series, even if they are practice alternative strategies, and there's just not that much time. We're almost halfway through the split already. You need wins on the board if you're going to try and make it into a good spot.
And I think it's really interesting that you actually bring up RNG as like one of the teams that you think can adapt, because I actually think the opposite. I think RNG, if you get rid of like Lissandra or like engage mid laners like TF or even a Galio slightly, and you then got enchanter supports, I feel like that team struggles so much. Like, losing both Xiaohu and Ming as your main engage tools, I don't think Wei has it set up. I don't think Breathe has really shown. He used to play a bit of Ornn back when he was Curse and OMG, but that team was still very, very messy. Like, I don't know. I think there's so many teams that, like, if you get rid of just engage supports and like a tiny shift comes through where maybe another big voice in your team isn't able to provide that, I feel like that we're going to start to see them crumble so much.
Maybe. I don't know. I feel like just in my mind, I'm thinking like Xiaohu can just mind control his teammates, you know, just command them and make it happen. I feel like it's just, you know, I feel like the team are on the same page at the moment is my view for RNG right now. And I think they will work and like developing strategies regardless of the meta. But I think you have a valid point. Like, they definitely have looked best with either Xiaohu or Ming providing that primary, like, I am the go-in person. So it'll be interesting to see how, or if they do develop that, or if they just stick to what it is. Because I think the fact they've lent so heavily on Lissandra, irrespective of it being, like, you know, we saw Lissandra as that Ari counter, great, but then Xiaohu's just been picking it regardless, just because of the fact it gives him agency. And the meta really hit right in spring playoffs, because we had Starter Split, it was like Corki, Victor, kind of snoozer meta, and then as it shifted towards that more agency picks, like things like the Galio, the TF, the Ari, the LeBlanc, that's really where RNG thrived and shone. So yeah, maybe they just will struggle depending on how the meta pans out, and if teams start to adapt and show that, like, right, these enchanter picks are already strong.
So it just on that then, because we're kind of touching on like a little bit of RNG and maybe how we see the meta going. Like, at the moment, who do you actually think are our potential like top teams towards the end of the split? Because I think RNG, no doubt, people have up there. I think V5 people have up there, top esports as well. I think JDG, a lot of people were saying for a while they were the best team in the LPL. I don't fully agree with that. I think JDG definitely has a ton of issues where we've only kind of lightly touched on it, where I think they make a ton of mistakes in the early game and then just kind of double down on, hey, we're going to just throw our head against the wall and hope if we can break through. Oftentimes it leads them to getting caught out. I think there's a lot of stuff there that can cause issues. So, yeah, I mean, I guess the question is, like, who do you see as our top teams? And, I mean, are they going to be able to adapt to such a shifty meta?
I mean, I guess I'll go first. I feel like at the moment, at least the way V5 are playing, but, well, anyone's legend, best team in the league, so, you know, going toe-to-toe, you know. Yeah.
Respect on their name, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I think at the moment, the way that they're playing, like, just generally, I'm not going to get into specifics, I just feel like they're dismantling most of the teams that they're playing against pretty consistently and at a very high level. We still need to see them play against some of the other top, you know, sort of 4 top 5 teams, because they haven't really like had a huge challenge yet, per se, or like huge challenges back to back, I think is probably the better way to phrase it. But anything like less than top 3 would definitely be like a surprise. Like, me seeing V5 in finals right now, looking how they're playing, would probably be like my expectation of them. at the very least. I don't know how you guys feel about like some of the teams around them or who would maybe go against them, because I agree with your sentiment, Rob. I think JDG are a bit of a bait team at the moment. I think that they aren't as strong as they look on paper, just by like series wins alone. Because yeah, it has been like, even some of the games they win, some of them just look a little bit too dodgy for me to be like, yeah, this is top 1 material like LPL.
Yeah, and it's not even just the fact that like they look dodgy. Like, they haven't exactly had a very hard split so far, right? Like, you look at the teams they've beaten. They start off against, Top Esports, who basically couldn't have thrown that game harder if they tried with that bot lane dive. Like, I mean, like the fact that I think anyone could have caught that game. Like, it was abysmal. They then beat LGD, EDG. I would give them their due. That was a good series. But then OMG, a struggling Ultra Prime, TT. Like, these aren't exactly teams that are absolutely far and away amazing. And they pretty much had, like, 1, if not 2 bad games, every single one of them. So I don't know. I like, personally, I think they're like the Weibo of spring. I think we're going to see them. They start off, like, looking on a hot streak, and everyone's like, oh my god, they're great. And then they just shift right the way down. Because you look at, like, week 7 for these guys. IG, BLG, V5, RNG, Weibo, and then anyone's legend. Like, that is a super tough end to the split.
Road to the top.
Yeah. So, realistically, I think they're going to keep going for a little bit of time. Maybe we'll see how they do against FPX tomorrow, but then they got LNG, Rare Atom, WE. I think if they can get over the hurdle of FPX, this team's going to look great, and then we're just going to see them crash towards the end of the split.
I will say the thing I disagree with that. You said JDG might be the Weibo of spring. I think Weibo will be the Weibo of spring. I refuse to believe that this team will be in the top 4. I don't know. I cannot wrap my head around SOFM and how he approaches the game. Despite the fact I think the Shy is playing well, I can't piece together. I can't see it. I can't see it happening. So, remains to be seen. I think for me, we actually recorded this yesterday and had some technical issues, and then we've had to re-record. And yesterday I said V5. I actually think, and maybe it's partially because of the series we had today, but also thinking about it, I did go away and think about it a bit. I actually think I am going top esports first. I'm not sure RNG have adapted well to the meta yet. I'm not sure if they're going to. And as much as I think RNG will be good, I think top esports at their peak, I favor. Right, I think top esports also, if they were a good matchup into V5 in spring. I don't know if it'll pan out the same, but I think they're just stacked. I think the top side of the map is solid. I think Jackie Love is Jackie Love. I am. Jackie Love, I think, is, he can be all over the place, but like, he can carry when it comes to it. Mark has probably the weak spot for me. I'm a bit unsure about Mark. And I'm hoping he gets a bit more consistency. That would really make it for me if Mark can have a consistent performance. But I think top esports I could comfortably put at the top. But regardless, I think they'll definitely make Worlds. V5 are another definite for me. RNG are another definite. Those 3 I feel like are locked in. I feel like it's just where you think they'll rank. At the moment, I'm kind of going top esports, V5, RNG. But, that could definitely change. I think the 4th spot is the really tricky one. Because I think there's solid arguments for JDG, EDG, or anyone's legend. Maybe a bit more time for anyone's legend. I guess some people will obviously argue Weibo. I don't see it. I think I'm honestly... Again, I said JDG yesterday. I thought JDG would be in the top 4.
You thinking about it?
And I thinking about it, I said, maybe we did disservice to them by not putting them there. But I actually think I could see EDG taking it. I think I said this at the start of the split. I said I think the meta suits EDG. I think Mako is someone who can play those attempts and makes it work. I think Viper still, I said this in spring, best AD carry in the world. He is so good. They do have issues. Like, don't get me wrong, EDG do have issues. They are not a perfect team. They're not even close at the moment. But I think they can bring it together, and I think the meta is good for them. And I think that will be enough. And maybe if they come in as like a 4th seed for Worlds, they could be like a dark horse. But they still need time. They still need work. But I think that's what I'm going for at the moment. Top esports, V5, RNG, EDG.
I want to be on the top esports hype train with you, but I just haven't believed. I haven't believed in Mark since LGD when they went to Worlds in like 2020.
Yeah.
Like, I have seen that man miss far too many easy Zenith blades to ever have trust that he can hit his abilities when it counts. Like, he's just been far too inconsistent. And then when you add in that inconsistency of Jackie Love, that's where I have the problems. And the thing is, I actually think, because this is a discussion I always have with Lyric, and I think, Ox, you are on the Lyric side. I'm going to find out where Jamada lies with me. Because Lyric believes in the mojo, believes in like the higher ceiling will win. And that's always where Lyric sits. And he's like, if you have the higher ceiling, you will win a best of 5. And I'm like, no, I feel like over a best of 5, the consistency is what's going to win out. Because yes, you can have that clutch factor in moments, but you still have to get to like the game 5 for that to end up working out. And I just don't see how Top Esports, I think, will win the whole thing. I still think Top Esports will be top 2, I think. At least top 3, definitely anyway. But it is a very big question mark of, like, in those playoffs, how do they perform against... Because my other 2 top teams are, like, V5 and RNG. And that's where I'm like, in a best of 5 scenario, do I see the consistency from Top Esports being there to... And like, the elevation to their higher ceiling consistently there. So they can actually beat V5 RNG over a best of 5 series. And that's where I always struggle to put them ahead.
You know, I feel like Spring was pretty close. You know, it wasn't too far away. And you could definitely argue the consistency. But I honestly, I feel like you take the consistency argument and you take it a step further. Because I feel like, with regards to consistency, it's like RNG, I feel like, in my mind, are like a consistent team. You know what you're going to get from them. They're very good at the team play. They make it work. They won MSI. They won last MSI. But they didn't win Worlds. And I don't think they'll win Worlds this time round. Because I think the teams with the high ceiling are the FPXs who bomb out in groups, but also the EDG who just come in and win it all, right?
Yeah.
Top Esports are a team I could see both getting knocked out in groups or winning Worlds. I think you could go either way because you never know. If the meta hits right and Jackie Love has a tournament of his life and Knight decides he wants to win, I could see this team completely just going sicko mode and dominating. But like, that's the thing, you never know. And I feel like the LPL, the epitome of these LPL teams are these ones where the variance is so high. We drop a team in groups at Worlds, it always happens, and then one team is just the meta hits right, everything hits right, all the players have the tournament of their life. EDG is a great example, right? EDG won Worlds, JJ best jungler in the world. What happened since then? Where's he gone? Like, JJ's still fine, but like, we have the same roster in EDG and Spring. I'm like, who is this team? Summer, I'm still like, where are they, right? And I feel like that is what I could see happening for Top Esports. And that is kind of the reason I feel like RNG hasn't managed to get a world title. Because when they go to MSI, there's less teams to go up against. They're good at preparing. They did a very good job against T1 and obviously a good job against Damwon. And they perform. They find the consistency. People will say, I think a lot of people agree, T1 underperformed at MSI compared to expectation. And RNG hit. They were like, yeah, this is what we expect. Maybe a bit higher, definitely for sure. But they came and they delivered on what they're good at. Whereas, like, I feel like Top Esports, I even said, like, if Top Esports had gone to MSI, I could see them just winning the whole thing or, like, coming 5th in the Rumble stage. You really never know. But that sort of variance is what wins you World Championship. So that's my hopium copium mojo speech about Top Esports. Okay. I'm fully on the hype train in case it wasn't clear. I'm fully on the mojo with Lyric if that wasn't specifically clear.
Yeah, I kind of agree, and I'll be brief. I feel like the only time that consistency has ever, in my opinion, trumped ceiling was like that SKT dynasty from like 2015 to 17. Yeah. Because they were A, consistent, but B, at the same time, they were consistently a higher ceiling team than everybody else on the planet. So it's kind of a difficult argument to really strive, right? I think whenever you see a team win in a national tournament, more times than not, they probably weren't even the favorite, right? I think that's actually unironically kind of true. You will see just kind of a dark horse team who people were expecting to finish high just have a better day or have a stronger read on the tournament as a whole, or the team that they go up against in the finals compared to the teams that we expect to win, consistently winning. I think the only time that was actually true was like 2014 Samsung White and then like the SKT dynasty that happened right after that. But since it's normally just a team that you don't quite always expect to be first place, always towards the top end for sure, that just happen to have a really, really high ceiling. And the consistency is normally what drags people away from saying that they would have finished first before, obviously, the result itself.
Yeah, I mean, even if you think to Top Esports in 2020, like everyone thought Top Esports would be the favorites, and then Damwon were the ones who ended up winning it. You know, I feel like and then people for 2021 were thinking Damwon or FPX, and then it ended up being EDG. I feel like the thing as well is like the game was very different in like the SKT dynasty. It was like very controlled. There was a lot more vision to work with. You know, it felt like there was a playbook that had been written by the top Korean teams, and the best team who could match that would end up winning. and SKT were just the best team at matching that, and they won a lot. Whereas I feel like the game now, the fact that there's less vision, you know, the fact we had super bursty gameplay where like if you overstep in a pocket where you don't have vision, you get blown up, and you have like all these heavy engaged supports, that kind of led to like a more very fast-paced, sporadic game where like it's about punishing these windows and finding these opportunities, not just like this clear-cut controlled. And I think that's where not only has the LPL thrived, but also these high-ceiling teams have the ability to pop off because it isn't so much about control. You have to make the big plays that can backfire, but when they hit right, you end up succeeding. And you know that's something to mention as well. It's like I just mentioned, like this was like when the game was fast-paced, things were very bursty. Maybe with this Worlds, the durability patch, we see the game slow down a bit, and that can lend more favor to teams who are more controlled. But, I mean, it remains to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only part that has me, like, questioning how top esports is going to do is, like, if the meta shifts into Knight's favor, I think he's just going to pop off. Like, if we see these, like...
Dude, we have Silas at the moment.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If we see these, like, long, drawn-out fights where you get a ton of healing and things like Silas are back into the meta and that kind of stuff, like, he's going to have a fantastic split, a fantastic tournaments if he does end up making it to Worlds and even just in playoffs in general. So I think that's the only caveat where I'm kind of looking to see, like, are we shifting into... that meta where Knight can kind of pop off, because we've seen him before where like on things like Silas's, on things even when like Viego was in the mid lane, like these kind of melee damage dealers, he is so good at understanding his limits and like getting as much as possible from those champions. So I think it'd be super interesting to see if we can like see the shift back into that. I think maybe top esports could bring it out, but I don't know, because I think the biggest question mark again for me is like just bringing it back to V5. What the hell did they look like with Rookie? Like, I mean, do we see Rookie? Like, at this stage, I mean, Dream has looked unbelievable. I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Like, at this stage, like, I know we will see Rookie, like, realistically, but, I mean, Dream's putting in a good argument.
Yeah, I think, like, the plus side is Dream has absolutely established that he is going to be a star in the LPL for his career going forwards, and hopefully on a top team. I think the problem is, like, when you look at V5 top esports and probably RNG, those are the teams where, like, it doesn't matter how... I mean, actually, I don't even take RNG out of that because they had that period where Xiaohu was top. I think V5 and top esports, I think no matter how good your submid does, you're still going to have Rookie as your starter, you're still going to have Knight as your starter. Those guys are just too good. And I think as a result, we'll get Rookie back and that'll be what they go with. I also think, like, kind of go into... You said about the melee meta with Knight. I feel like depending on what the meta could be, because like for RNG, Xiaohu's meta definitely feels like at the moment is like the active roaming mids. His map reads are fantastic, so things like the Galio, the Twisted Fate, the Sandra at the moment, very good for him. As you said, things like Silas, if it was Viego mid again for Knight, are fantastic. For V5, I think Rookie is just such a good control mage player. Like, I remember it was last split when we had the V5 top esports matchup in the regular season, and Rookie just completely schooled Knight. Like, Knight looked like he was dominating every mid matchup until we had that best of 3, and it just looked like Rookie was just a step above. So it could be interesting to see like who ends up coming out ahead in terms of the meta, but I think no matter what the meta is, like, as much as we're saying, you know, this is where they have the edge, Rookie is just too good. And I think Dream, you know, it's kind of bittersweet, but I'm sure he'll have like a lengthy career that'll like really shine. But I just want to see V5 with Rookie, and I want to see them up against top esports, because that'll be a banger.
Yeah, no, I think no matter how you like splice it, Rookie coming in is realistically almost always going to be an upgrade, right? I think, like you said, Dream has put on an absolute show for himself. So 2023, I expect it to be on a top roster, honestly, given how he's been performing. I was actually talking with Munch earlier, and I feel like at worst, from Rookie's point of view, they like share time. But I feel like shared time on most rosters doesn't really work in terms of like long-term development for the team, in my opinion, unless you've got like two mid laners with very defined styles. So it's like, you know, you might have your roaming mid laner against your sort of like very static, you know, Corki Azir like kind of player, and then if you're playing into teams that you feel like one is better than the other in terms of what you want to draft towards, then, you know, you field that player instead. I just don't feel like that's going to be the case for V5. I feel like Rookie's just going to come back. I know, Dan, you were saying yesterday, he's like 115, 113 games or something ridiculous over the last...
107 solo queue games in the last... In a week, because he's been in quarantine waiting to come back because he was over in Korea. 107 in a week. So he's not going to be rusty.
No,
right?
he's not coming in rusty. He's not coming in cold. He's coming in bloody flaming hot. Like, his hands are going to be ready. He's very clearly very, very motivated to get back into the starting roster. And, you know, do his thing, like just plain and simple. So
Just very
kind
quickly
of
on that,
yeah.
I did a quick maths there. If it is like an hour per game, let's say, that means he spent in the last 7 days about 4.5 days in solo queue. Just playing solo queue in a week. That's obscene.
I mean, you're in quarantine. What else are you gonna do? You know what I mean?
Some people's hell, man, 4.5 days in a week. But yeah, it just really goes to show Rookie is like rearing to go very clearly. And I feel like, yeah, like Dan said, it's gonna be bittersweet for Dream, but at the end of the day, I think he set himself up to have a very, very successful like long-term career. Probably, assuming he gets onto the top roster, which given the performance so far, it would be a pretty big surprise if he doesn't end up on, a team that, basically not top at the RNG, basically.
So we've got about 5 minutes left in this, lads. So I just wanted to ask you, after today's series against Anyone's Legend, like, has your opinion on V5 changed, or like, do you think that it was just a really good day for Anyone's Legend? Like, has that influenced you a lot?
Do you want to go with that?
Yeah, I feel like I had pretty high estimations of AL. Like, I think my main issue with them in spring was consistency, and I think the consistency has gone better. But like, I still like the fact they can lose to LGD. I feel like they're a team who I like when they challenge the likes of V5. I'm not hugely surprised. I can definitely see it. I do think V5 definitely, this was probably the game where they would, like, the series where they looked the most challenged, especially given that, like, the other series they were challenging was against RNG. I don't think it's definitely true, because I even said, like, yesterday I put V5 at the top and today I put top esports. I think my estimations definitely have shifted, but it's still so hard to read, because I think they will be stronger when Rookie comes in, given a bit of time to adjust. I still think they're really good. I still think this is a team where, like, if they get a lead, like we saw game 2 against AL today, if they get a convincing lead, they're so good at, like, establishing control. I just think there's still some question marks. And I think, like, for example, Carcer can be quite volatile. Rich had, like, the Aatrox game, which was, like, completely nothing, but then he has other games where he's, like, very, very relevant. Photic and PP God is a big question mark. I think that's probably my biggest question mark on this roster, is because PP God, like, can just, like, make these in plays. Game 1 against AL was a great example. Photic as well, I think he's solid, but I also think there's, like, some champions where I think he's, like, world class. Senna is a great example. I think his Zeri was very good today. But then there's other champions where, like, if the meta shifts to a certain place, I don't feel as confident in him.
I think that's a fair criticism. I still feel like V5 are looking like our stronger teams. They definitely do have some of the inconsistencies, but again, I feel like generally they've just dismantled most of the teams super efficiently that they've played against. I think AO maybe playing towards, your world champion level today in their series. But yeah, I don't see them not. I feel like the other one, at least the other obvious one to me, is just top esports again. I feel like they are continually just scaling into the split so far. Obviously, kind of shaky start, both their first series and their second series. But I think just since then, even though, yes, there's some question marks of Mark and even Jackie Love to a degree, I just feel like both these rosters, to me, they're both very capable of playing through all 3 lanes and even to a degree jungle as well, which I think is a super valuable thing to have. Even if we're maybe going into a slightly like lower economy jungle meta, we're still teams are still kind of deciding whether they want like hard farmers or like your Jarvans back in the meta basically. I just feel like those tools are just super valuable to have like roster side, and I don't really see them not being top 2, top 3 towards the end of the split. I feel like the other teams, like the other contenders, right, your likes of your RNG, still gonna be going to Worlds. My opinion, RNG not sold on JDG. That's basically like the only team right now in the top sort of like 4 or 5 where I'm like, will you be representing LPL at Worlds? Maybe as the 4th seed, like at best. I don't know.
I'm just glad you guys have given me the hope I wanted for V5, because I'm not gonna lie, after spring, look, maybe this is why I don't believe in Mojo. Like, I've been hurt too many times before. I don't want to like give my love to someone and then just have it like slapped to my face. But like, I was infatuated with V5 in spring. I thought this was our team. I thought this was the guys that were going to represent us for MSI. I think a lot of people were on that boat. But to see them like fail so spectacularly in playoffs with like Rich, I'm not gonna lie, inting his face off. He looked absolutely
Yeah.
abysmal. And then seeing the inconsistency from Fotik and PP God, I think Ox, you kind of touched on it there as well. Like, I think that's where a lot of my worries come in. And I think this is definitely a team that when Rookie comes in, Rookie's definitely a bit of the dad of this team, where he's kind of like, look, come along now, children. You're not gonna do the silly thing. Don't do the silly thing. And very much has a good bit of control. So I think this is something that we'll probably see a lot more of from V5, where that consistency starts to come in when Rookie's back, and especially after taking such a long break. And if he is playing that much solo queue, definitely feels like he's coming in with a lot of filled with determination and wants to make sure that he's able to hit those super high highs ahead of the World Championship as well. But I think there's going to be this is a topic I feel like we're going to hit a lot over the next coming weeks on the podcast, especially as we see how the meta starts to shift out, like which teams are getting a better grasp of it, which teams it starts to suit. And I think it's kind of part of the reason why I wanted to bring up the discussion now, because it feels like as we start to kind of get the ins and outs of what these new patches are going to look like, how the teams are going to fluctuate within the LPL as a result. But guys, we have just hit our hour mark. So do you have any last remarks or anything that you want to say before we close things out?
I'll go first, I
Yeah,
guess.
go ahead.
I'll restate it. I said it earlier today. I think FPX got upset JDG tomorrow. If you're watching this from the future and this has happened, then please praise me as the prophet I am. And if it hasn't happened, please forget this message.
You know what? I'm going to get behind that message, actually. I wouldn't be surprised if FPX beat JDG, but if they lose 2-0 in like 25-minute games, then yeah, forget that also came out of my mouth. Yeah, no, I mean, generally, just thank you for having me, I think. Away from the probable other thing I was going to say, it's been super fun, and the LPL is full of very stacked teams.
Well, thanks for joining us, Jamada. Honestly, you absolutely smurfed it. And look, I don't get to make these decisions, so I'm going to say this out loud. You're welcome anytime, because there's no backlash, because I don't get in trouble for this if I'm wrong. I don't get to make these choices.
It's a double whammy. Not only do we get Jamada here, but we also don't have Lyric here. Like, can it get better? It's the bonus.
Well, yeah, thank you very much for joining us, folks. That is going to be our episode of The Last Hit. Make sure you are joining us next week. We'll be tuning in to find out if we get to abuse Ox for all of his wrong predictions, or if it will be correct. But thank you very much. I hope you have a great night, and we'll catch you then in solo queue.